Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War and the future of Total War and Creative Assembly. Creative Assembly is at the crossroads right now. They're at a critical point where, depending on what they decide to do, things can either go very poorly for them or they can start improving. Now, improvement will not happen overnight. Regardless of what Creative Assembly does right now, it is going to take time and a lot of work and effort for Creative Assembly to improve their situation. They have burned a lot of goodwill with the fan base at this point. People are fed up with it. Shadows of Change didn't sell a lot of copies. Apparently, Forge the Chaos Dwarfs did not sell what they expected, though people have made the claim that it has sold over 170,000 copies within like a couple of months, if even faster than that. So Creative Assembly's expectations were very, very unrealistic with regards to how things were going to work out. Basically, their money-making machine is about to collapse on itself. If they do not handle things very well with Thrones of Decay in particular, it might be the end point for them. Because if Warhammer 3 collapses, if they can't sell DLC, and if people are not interested in buying that DLC, that's kind of it for CA right now, and especially after they've lost $100 million, which, as I've stated, that is one of the biggest failures in the entire gaming industry. Like, if anyone knows of a bigger failure than a company spending $100 million and flushing it down the toilet and making nothing for it in return because they lost everything with Hyenas, if anyone knows any kind of similar example, please let me know, because I'm struggling really hard right now to find out any kind of example. But what I want to talk about in this video is more long-term, what I think Creative Assembly should do with future games. Because one of the problems that has existed for a while, and something I've talked about for months, is that what happens after Total War Warhammer? Because what they've done with Three Kingdoms, what they did with Troy, and even Pharaoh, is they haven't been able to move on from the gameplay design or the game design that has existed since Warhammer 1, which was anyway built on Rome 2. So we're still in the Rome 2 period of Total War. And fundamentally, the games, sure, there's flying units, there's magic units, there's better pathfinding AI, etc. But fundamentally speaking, Creative Assembly has never moved past the legacy of Rome 2. They kind of tried with Three Kingdoms, but they were still copying Warhammer in quite a few ways. And I'm going to say outright, you can't make a historical game based on the principles that exist in Warhammer. Well, they could have done it with Troy, had they focused far more heavily on mythological units, had that been a very significant part of it. It could have worked out, but they kind of tried to do both things at the same time. No, Creative Assembly needs to have a clear-cut direction of what they're doing. If they keep trying to make games that are like Warhammer Light, or don't improve things significantly, or they're copying the gameplay mechanics without any of the unique aspects that make the Warhammer games work, it's just going to end up being a dismal failure. In the same way, Three Kingdoms, Troy, and Pharaoh have ended up being dismal failures for Creative Assembly. There are some things they could have done far differently with Three Kingdoms than what they ended up doing. And it is quite unfortunate that particular title was abandoned. I'm a big fan of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or the Three Kingdoms period. Cao Cao is one of my favorite characters in history. Like, when you look at what he did, how he was as a leader. So it was a major disappointment for myself and many others, the way Creative Assembly ended up handling that particular aspect. But let's talk about certain things. Let's talk about scale of battles, or just scale in general. The scale of battles and the scale of the campaign map hasn't really changed fundamentally since the days of Rome 1. Yes, you look at Shogun 1, you look at Medieval 1, and then you look at Rome 1. There was a significant difference in terms of scale, in terms of gameplay design, than what had come before. But since then, the army sizes, the unit sizes, the campaign map, the scale of a campaign, the pacing of the campaign, that hasn't really fundamentally changed since the days of Rome 1. And it needs to. Like, what Rome 1 accomplished back then was astounding. Like, you had battles with thousands of units, and if you really pushed it and modded it, you could have tens of thousands of units, but realistically, it was more thousands of units. That was an amazing feat that Creative Assembly accomplished back then, that they have never replicated since then. Now, we have gotten games like Ultimate Battle Simulator 1 and 2. Like, you look at the millions of units that Ultimate Battle Simulator 2 can render on screen on modern systems. Like, we're not talking here like extraordinary space machines, sci-fi computers. No, we're talking about actual computers that exist right now. And the crazy part is that Ultimate Battle Simulator can have significantly more units, can have far larger scale than any Total War game has ever done, or all of them put together, and run actually better than Total War does. That is extraordinary when you think about it. There is no excuse for Creative Assembly to not improve the scale. Now, how you would manage control of units, all that is a different discussion, and obviously something that they should focus on. Look, I'm not a game developer, but what we want is scalability. Now, I don't think Total War would need millions of units in a single battle because because no battle in history involved that many men. But what would be great to see would be battles with hundreds of thousands of units. Like, you think of battles like Gaugamela, you think of various historical battles, and what would be crucial about being able to achieve large-scale battles or being able to render millions of soldiers on screen is what they could then do with that in the campaign. One of the biggest problems I think exists in Total War, and this has been one of my issues for years now. It was fine, again, like things were fine, like, things were amazing when Rome 1 and Medieval 2 came out. Things have changed. We do expect better, we do expect development, and we haven't gotten that. People have talked about technical debt, people have talked about pathfinding, sieges, AI, and all that. But on a fundamental level, I think that the way Total War games works right now is just not that great. I think one of the things Creative Assembly should do is they should make large-scale battles, as I've said, but they should also use the ability of rendering millions of soldiers on screens, which is achievable with modern technology, for the record. It is possible. I'm not saying it would be easy to adapt that in a video game form that isn't just a showpiece, which is like what the Ultimate Battle Simulator 2 ultimately is, but it could be done. Not easily, but it's a AAA developer. Ultimate Battle Simulator is made by, one guy or a very small team. Clearly, they don't have a great deal of excuses with regards to Total War. With regards to a company that can spend $100 million on a game, they have absolutely no excuses for not improving the scale. But imagine if Total War could render millions of soldiers on screen at the same time with solid performance. Well, suddenly you can have a real-time campaign where the large-scale battles are happening at the same time as you're managing your empire. So you could have troops marching from one corner of your empire to take part of one of those large-scale battles. That's just an idea. Imagine a Medieval 3 where, let's say, a war starts out and initially it's just a couple of skirmishing units on the border, but then the armies are assembling, and you see these armies assembling, you see them marching out, you see them join forces, and you see these colossal battles. And it could add a real sense of tactical depth. Real-time with pause would be the way to do it. And we already have real-time with pause in Total War battles, minus on Legendary. That should be removed, by the way. Legendary difficulty is annoying crap. Like, it would not work if you can pause the game on certain difficulties, and like that would be really difficult to manage. But imagine real-time management of territory where it's time-based. Like, yeah, Paradox games have it. One game that really inspired me with regards to this was Nobunaga's Ambition Sphere of Influence. I'm not sure how things are done in the sequels to that, but because Sphere of Influence came out quite a few years ago, and while it was very simplistic in terms of its graphics, like basically sprite-based when we're thinking about how the graphics were, what I loved about that game is when two armies engaged in a battle, right? That battle was taking place real time, and the campaign map was also real time. So, for instance, let's say you had two units meeting on the campaign map, then a battle would start taking place. If you scrolled in, basically if you zoomed in, then the battle would then you would move to a different map. But it was done. Just scrolling it with your mouse. You would scroll in, the battle would take place, and what would happen if you didn't engage in direct control is most of the time what would end up happening is like they would just skirmish with with each other, and the casualties would be very slow. But what was very interesting about this, because the campaign map was not paused at the same time, like let's say you start a battle with a couple of units, then you can send reinforcements, and this also applied to the AI. So you had these really dynamic battles. Yes, they were very simplistic, they were not all that great in a lot of ways, but the idea that this game had was a really great idea, where you really have dynamic campaigns, dynamic battles, as opposed to really the separation between battles in the campaign map, which I think really hurts Total War right now. Corner campaign is not a great situation. The lack of flexibility that that is imposed on the player because we're forced to fight on these arena-style maps is also not that great. Now, I'm not saying this would be easy, nor am I saying that necessarily all of this should be done at the same time, but the idea of a larger scale Total War game with a real-time campaign with pause would be really the way to go. It would also make the multiplayer situation work much better. Like, imagine a multiplayer campaign where you have large-scale battles involving tens of thousands of units. At the same time, you are managing your empire. How you would handle that in terms of speed? Probably a lower speed, right? You would need to have a slower pace in general to the battles, I think, if that was going to work. But that would be fine, like slowing things down in Total War, allowing people more time to make those kind of decisions would be probably the way to go from my perspective. And then on top of that, better campaign mechanics. Like, one of the things in Nobunaga's Ambition Sphere of Influence, that it had much better campaign mechanics in terms of the way you dealt with your retainers, with your vassals, like how you commanded your faction, how you dealt with allies. You know how we have the allegiance system in Warhammer 3, and we can use that to get an army or give certain orders? Well, Nobunaga's Ambition had an influence system which did pretty much the same thing. You could get an army from an ally or a vassal for influence. You could give them orders for that influence. Pretty similar system. I wonder where all the inspiration came from. In fact, I see a lot of inspiration from the Nobunaga's Ambition, or those types of games, or Dynasty Warriors, really. I see a lot of influence in Free Kingdoms, and I really hope that Creative Assembly doesn't just look at Free Kingdoms right now and say, well, that was a failed project. It was, certainly, in a number of ways, but the ideas that were developed for Free Kingdoms shouldn't just be abandoned for Creative Assembly trying to replicate what Warhammer has already done, because it's not going to work. Like, it would only work maybe if they make an Age of Sigmar game, maybe if they make an Old World game. Sure, that's how they could copy and paste what they've already done in Warhammer. But if they're moving on and trying to develop a future historical game, which we assume that they are working on, either Empire 2 or Medieval 3, that's been the speculation, then they really need to adapt how the campaign system works. So I would like larger scales, real-time campaign, and a dynamic battle system, much more dynamic system, and a better interaction between the battles and the campaign map. That, I think, would make for a significantly better Total War experience than what we have gotten for a very, very long time. You do that, and you have a focused campaign. Like, one of the things to mention, I do not think Creative Assembly needs to make the entire world available, because depending on the period of history, like when you're thinking about, let's say, the wars between Carthage and Rome, not much else should matter except, Carthage and Rome and what's happening there. So I don't think they could make a game where they make a globe in certain time periods. That would work, or a mega project if they wanted to. But I also think that they need to have different types of campaigns. Like, you can have a big sandbox campaign map. You can also have more focused campaigns. Like, we look at Free Kingdoms, they were trying to do this, and by the way, this is based on Dynasty Warriors, and Nobunaga's Ambition had different starting positions with different start states for different factions, with different lords, different characters. This is something, by the way, they were trying to replicate in Free Kingdoms. It didn't quite work out because of various issues that Free Kingdoms did have that made it very unappealing for a lot of people to play. Like, honestly, like Free Kingdoms, I didn't particularly enjoy it. Like, I appreciate the idea of trying to follow the path of history, though I would like to point out that a game like Nobunaga's Ambition did not have it as DLC. It was part of the base game. So having at least a couple of campaigns as starting campaigns, and then later on, yeah, you can do DLCs. But if there's going to be a game like Free Kingdoms, it should be focused on the Free Kingdoms, or the build up to that, not just like the very initial period of it. Like, that's where I stand on that. subject. And I really would like to see more focused campaigns on crucial aspects of history. Like Napoleon did this. Like Napoleon did this with his Italian campaign, his Egyptian campaign, and then his invasion of Russia. And that's one of the reasons I think Napoleon is actually a much better game than people give it credit for. And I don't think Creative Assembly should abandon that design. They should put more effort. They should improve the cinematics, lip syncing, characters, dialogue, voice acting. Improve the graphics, because in a lot of ways the Total War does look very outdated and it feels very outdated in a significant number of ways. So those are kind of the principal areas I would like Creative Assembly to focus on. If you guys have any ideas, if you guys have any perspectives to add on this subject, please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon, would be very much appreciated. Stay tuned for more.